Hi, today we're going to talk a little bit about our midterm program and looping through user input. It is a concept that can be very challenging to people, and so we might need a little bit more assistance in thinking about it. First of all, I'm going to write an application here that prompts a user for input and asks the user for an integer number and then determines if that number is even or odd and displays a message to the user. The user will continue to be prompted until they enter -1, which will be our sentinel value to end execution on this program. Because it's a little complicated, I'm going to use a design tool and write some pseudocode to kind of get my thoughts straight about how I want this program to work. So I've got Notepad open, and I'm going to call this program EvenNumber. And in EvenNumber, I'm going to have my main module, of course, or at least in my pseudocode. I might implement this as a class structure or something a little different, of course, depending on my language. We know we'll be using C#, so we might want to make a class for this, but in our pseudocode, we'll just say that this is our main module. In our main module, to begin, I'm going to need an integer, and I'm going to call this int number. And when my program begins, I'm going to set int number to a value returned by my request input module. Now, I apologize if my pseudocode is not exactly the way your instructor did it in the 120 class. Remember, pseudocode is kind of free form, so when we're outside of the 120 class, we can be a little bit more flexible and try to get our thoughts down so that we can work on implementing our logic in whatever language we're using. So I'm going to be calling a module request input, and the return from that is going to be the number that I'm going to use to process for my user. Now I am going to begin a loop here after I get that number back, and I want to loop while that number is not equal to -1, right? Because as soon as I get a -1 back from my request input module, I'll be done looping. Within my loop, I don't have a lot of logic. If the int number is even, I want to display a message to my user. Maybe I'll say the number and then display the number to them and is even. Or if it's not even, I'll display a message, the number int number. And of course, right away I notice that I've got some duplication here, some redundancy in my code, which is kind of keen to me. I might be able to use a ternary structure in my code as I implement this. So I'll see. Now that's the end of my loop. If my user entered -1, I'm done. So that's the end of my module. Now I need to define my module. We'll make it mod request input. And in this module, I'm going to begin by prompting the user, and I'm going to say, please enter an integer -1 to quit. I'll put a space there. And then I'm going to read that user number. So I guess for my module I need to declare that. I'm going to say declare user number as a string. Oops, I did that a little backwards, didn't I? So let's declare string user number. Okay, our little pseudocode language here. Now I'm going to read user number, and then after my read, I'm going to go into a loop while my user number is not a valid integer. I'm going to respond and ask the user to enter a valid number. Please enter an integer, -1 to quit. And I'll read user number again. So of course in my actual code, I'll be doing something in that loop while condition to check to make sure it's a valid integer and working with it that way. But in my pseudocode, just saying, okay, I'll be done with the loop when they finally enter something that's a valid integer. When they do, I'm going to convert user number to an integer and put it in int number and return int number to my calling module. So that's going to end this module. Now I need to go ahead and just declare an integer in my module, int number. And I think that's all I need to do. So let's take a look at our pseudocode. We should be complete here. We start out with our main module, declare an integer named int number, set that number to a value returned by our request input module, then loop while that number is not equal to -1, check to see if it's even, display a message. If it's not, display a message that it's odd. That's the end of our loop and the end of our main module. Our request input module, we declare two variables, prompt the user for input data, read their data. While their data is not valid, we continue to prompt them and ask them for valid data, reading that data. When they finally give us valid data, we will convert it to an integer into our variable int number, and we will return int number to our calling module. So that pretty well does it for our logic for this program. We're in good shape there. Let's put this in Visual Studio now in our code. I'm going to move this off the screen so that I have room for you. And I'm going to open up an instance of Visual Studio. And I'm going to create a new project. It's going to be a console application. This is going to be EvenNumber. And I shouldn't have a lot to do here. Now, I mentioned to you that I would like to implement this as a class. So in my main, I'm going to rename program.cs to be EvenNumber App.cs. That's going to be our tester app. And then I'm going to add a class module to our project. So add a class. This class is going to be EvenNumber. Alright, in my class, I'm going to go ahead and document that. EvenNumber will accept a number and determine if it is even. So in my class, I need a couple of class fields. So first, I'm going to set up an integer, and we'll call this one int number. Okay, this is going to be the number that we're using to determine if we're even or not. The only other thing that I think I might need is a boolean, we'll leave it as a bool, called is even. And that's something that then we can set in our code to determine if our number that was passed to us is indeed even or not. I'm going to go ahead and select both of these to create our getters and setters, or encapsulate these items. So I'll use the quick action, encapsulate fields, but still use field. So that's going to give me the option there where my lowercase variables will be private and usable within my class, but the uppercase version of the variables will become my properties that are available to outside my class applications, and that'll keep me straight on things. Now remember, as soon as I do that, it inserts the getters and the setters for those fields, my class level fields. Let's put some comments in here. First of all, I have my class level fields. They are private and available to this class. So anybody, any code in our class can access those variables. Now, here are our class level properties. They are public and available outside of this class. Now, in our particular application, we may not really care whether people are allowed to get or set these values, but we'll go ahead and leave those in there for right now. I'm going to go ahead and create a constructor for my class, and for this one, I'm going to say that it is public even number, and just a sec here. Hang on. So in this public class, I am not going to have a default constructor where there's no parameter passed. I am only going to allow someone to use my class if they pass me a number. And that's got to be an integer. So my class constructor is going to require that I have an integer be passed to me. Now, when that happens, I'm going to set my class level variable EvenNumber equal to the number that was passed. I'm going to go ahead and set our isEven variable equal to the result of whether this number is even or not. So let's think about that. If I divide int number by 2 and receive no remainder, I know that this is an even number. Remember, to do that, I can use the modulus command that is the percent sign. So int number %2 says divide int number by 2 and return the remainder. So if that's equal to 0, I could go ahead and set isEven to true. Otherwise, I'm going to set isEven to false. Now remember, this is a ternary operation, so I've said set a value for isEven, evaluate the condition int number modulus 2 equals 0. So again, I'm saying if the remainder of the division of int number divided by 2 equals 0, return true to isEven, else return false. And our ternary operator is denoted by using the question mark before the true statement, then the colon, and the false statement. So in our constructor for our class, we've gone ahead and we've taken the value supplied by the user, we've set up our class variable EvenNumber to be that value, and we've set up our Boolean isEven so that we can just test that Boolean value in the future to see if this number is even or odd. Now, we could reevaluate this condition every time we wanted to make that determination, but we've decided in this situation we're going to set up a class level variable. That's something that you can do depending on how you want to handle it. I'm going to go ahead and document my constructor. Class constructor expects an integer number, and I'm going to see where I've got a problem here. Oh, I am missing a closing curly bracket. It should be all set there. Okay, so now I've established my class, and in my class I've said, hey, to construct an instance of my class, you need to call the EvenNumber class, but give me an integer. I don't need to do a lot in this class. I do want to override the toString method. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And in my toString method, what I want to return is that output that is going to tell my user whether the number was even or odd. So something along the lines of the number space, and then I'm going to add in, remember this is a string parameter, not an output message, so I have to use the plus sign and not a comma here. So I want to return the number plus int number plus the decision as to whether this was even or odd. So I can use a ternary operator again. I'm going to say is even, then use my question mark to say I want it to say is even, period, and then colon is odd. Now, I need to put that in some parentheses because it's evaluating whether or not our Boolean field is true. If our Boolean field is true, we're going to add the string is even to our return string. If the Boolean is even is false, we'll be adding the string is odd to our return string. That should finish up our class module. That's really all we need here because our output is pretty simple from this program. So I'm going to go now to my tester, and that is my EvenNumber app. Now notice in my class module, before I take off, I don't have anything about prompting the user. Prompting the user is outside the scope of this class. This class is set up to take an integer number and determine whether it's even or not. And so that's really all we have here. So let's go to our EvenNumber app, and this is where we're going to set up our loop to prompt our user for input. So in the main, we decided we needed an integer named int number, and I'm going to go ahead and outside of my main declare my module to prompt the user for input so that I don't get errors. So this is going to be public. It's going to return an integer value. Its name is going to be prompt for input. Is that what we put? Let me bring that back up. Ooh, request input. So that's what I had in my pseudocode. Request input and expects an integer. Oh, nope, we don't expect any input for this one, do we? We're just going to return an integer back to our caller. So in our code, we need to declare a string, and this is going to be our user number. And we're going to prompt the user. So how do we do that? Oh yeah, we use the write command. And we write, please enter an integer -1 to quit. I'll go ahead and make it say console.write instead of updating our declaratives. Okay, so console.write, please enter an integer -1 to quit, and then I'm going to say user number equals console.readline. Now, I've got my user input here, so I'm ready to make sure that it's actually valid input. And remember, we can do that with our try parse statement. So for this, I'm going to go ahead and put that as my while condition. So I want to repeat this loop, asking the user for input while they haven't given me anything valid. So I'm going to say while int dot try parse, oops, course, is my user number. And if it's valid, I want to output that into int number, which I have not declared yet. But if it is not valid, I'm going to return a false. So let's declare int number. Okay, so now my while loop says while user number does not parse to an integer, keep looping, and what I want to do in this loop is prompt the user and read again. So I will copy those lines of code to be within my loop. And now I've got it all set up where I'm saying, hey, while they haven't given us a good number, go ahead and prompt them again. Once we exit our loop, we have a good number from our user, so we can return int number to our calling routine. Yeah, it's used. Return int number. We'll set it equal to 0. You know, some people are having some trouble with this in Hypergrade 2. I might just go ahead and put in an assignment statement so that everybody knows that this variable is being used. Still mad at me, isn't it? Oh, it's talking about our main. Okay, so I'll get rid of that again. So in our main, they're absolutely correct. We have not used int number. Right now we're going to use it. We're going to set int number equal to whatever is returned from request input. And notice if I leave that static keyword out, can't find request input. Now, on our input module, we are returning -1 if the user put in -1. So this loop is going to be controlled by that. So while int number is not equal to -1, I want to repeat. And my repeat here is I'm just going to print out well, I'm not. First, I'm going to create an instance of my class, right? So my class is EvenNumber. Remember, to create an instance of our class, we name the class, then we name our instance. My instance is going to be a new instance of EvenNumber. And my EvenNumber constructor said, you have to pass me an integer. And the integer I want pass is int number, that number I just got back from the user. Now remember, when we call and create an instance of this class, we're not using our getters or setters or anything. All we're using is our class constructor, passing it an integer number, and in our class we're taking that number, determining if it's even or odd, and we should be able now to just do our console.write and specify that we want to output our instance. And that should write out that information using the toString override for the number that we put in. Okay, let's review. In our main module, we set up a variable called int number. We load that number up by calling our request input module. If our request input module returns a number that's not equal -1, we're going to create an instance of our class and output the instance. Now, to finish our loop, we need to go ahead and request another input number. So I'm going to end my loop by asking for another input. And now, of course, if the user types -1, This next time we request it, that will end our loop. We'll be all done. Review our request input. We have a priming read for the user. Then we continue asking them for input if they don't enter a valid number. Let's try to run this. I get the prompt, please enter an integer, -1 to quit. I'll try some letters. Oops, I need a space there. Oh, it didn't like that. That's good. It didn't let me get away with any letters. I'll try an integer 4. Oh, yep, the number 4 is even. Ooh, and it looks like I have a little bit of issues there with my output. Please enter an integer, -1 to quit. I'll try 5. 5 is odd. That looks good. I'll do -1. Okay. Now I saw that I need a little bit of spaces. First of all, on this one, I'm going to put a space after my period for each of those so that when the user types in a number, it won't be right up against my prompt. Then I'm going to take a look at my toString in my EvenNumber class, and I need to add a space. The number blank is even, is odd. We need to add a new line at the end of that, don't we? So we'll go ahead and put the plus sign and add our \new line, or \n to indicate our new line. I'm going to test it again. I'll enter some invalid data. Keeps prompting me. I'll enter an even number. The number 4 is even, and we have a new line. Looks a lot better. I'll enter a 5. The number 5 is odd, and we have a new line. And I'll -1 to quit, and I don't get any invalid data. So everything looks good. I'm going to go ahead and take a look at this class so that you can kind of see it again. It's hard to get the whole thing on one screen. What's really important here is our class constructor that does our logic, and our toString that just returns the string as to whether this number is even or is odd. I'm going to end this video at this point. Thank you. Please let me know if you have any questions.